What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, the Epoch of Edgelords here, and we are back with episode 147 of the video game therapy series. As I've said once before and many times again, it has been a while. I haven't played in a few weeks, so it's probably good for me just to get back into, talking to myself again, as healthy as that as healthy as that should be. Which I arguably actually do think it is healthy. As satirical as I say that, I genuinely do think there is, at least in the manner that I do talk to myself. I'm not speaking manic or self-indulgent or even I don't know, somber attitudes. I'm not doing any of that against myself. This is purely intellectual time with myself. I guess in that light, the first thing I want to talk about are just like these labels, and I haven't really. I've come around recently to kind of recognize more of things as labels and not like true things. So, I mean, not to say that nothing exists or that everything are just it's all just words, because I think that's just kind of a weak. That's like a weak literary hole to die on, to say that everything is words, nothing really means anything. But there certainly are labels and words that feel ultra powerful, now, or at least feel, I don't know, they seem to carry a lot of gravity in modern conversation, and maybe less gravity to me, but more to others. So I guess an example of this would be like these isms or ists. So like racism, racists, misogyny, like these words themselves are very they're very pointed. No one wants to be called a racist, but I'd almost argue to some extent by, I guess the extent to which we use and abuse these words. And I'm not making the clear argument that it's lost its meaning, because I think there certainly is a lot of punch that you lose by, repping it out, 1,000 times. But I think in general, younger people like me are less affected by these words. Like, so somebody. Maybe it's just a certain sect of young people, but like I wouldn't really. Someone calling me racist doesn't really do anything for me. Same with like being called a misogynist or being called any kind of ism or ists, or even words that aren't as mainstream. So like incel or something. That it's supposed to be more of a slight. I think labels in general don't do much for me. I don't really care about labels, both good labels and bad labels. Even if you said I was like, even if somebody called me a Giga Chad, it's not like I'd be like, yeah, like I wouldn't walk around with that as like as a badge of honor. In the same way, I wouldn't, if somebody called me racist or a misogynist or something, I wouldn't be like, hey, no, I'm not here. Let me prove to you that I'm not by, being a giant bitch or something. I wouldn't ever really. Just labels themselves don't mean that much to me, and I think older people, boomers in general, have maybe they took language more seriously, or just have a different. I'm not gonna say less serious, or, that younger people are less serious about their language, but they don't, let rhetoric isn't nearly as powerful to them. And maybe it's because, we grew up in a time where our most influential sources of input were mostly digital. So it's like video games and, videos and rich text, like there's not often like dialogue or, even like written word as being like crucially important. Like you even read like, I'll read old, the Gettysburg Address, or just like old speeches and stuff. And, obviously there's a ton of stuff that's packed in there, like literally, especially if it's a good, a good orator or a good speaker, but even like the way that they speak and the words that they use, like, the amount of focus and attention you have to like take each of those words and understand them is asking a lot. In that same way, it's like we might have thought and seen those words as very powerful, and words, being very powerful. And I still do believe that the written word itself is still very powerful. Like words, the spoken and written word are both, forces that we can use, towards whatever our ends and means are. I just think that in general, younger generation is less apprehensive of, labels, and maybe it's more extreme. Maybe there are people that are so sensitive to labels, and that might not be the more accurate, way to think about this. Is that I think it's a growing, bipolarity, where you're either extremely sensitive to labels and like You have to be certain of, indigenous area, be aware of all these different designations that you give people, lower income people, socioeconomically challenged. Then it's all about, all right, is the language of the words, is it in a way that is inoffensive and as sterile as possible? And Carlin had a huge bit about like the sterilization of language. I think his example was like shell shock, and then it was, post traumatic stress disorder, and then it was some other silly thing like post conflict internal. I mean, it's like they get just more and more silly as the years wear on, and now even to point out the ridiculousness of it, it's like people have PTSD from their laundry was too hot one time, and like that has given them post-traumatic stress disorder. When this used to mean that your three closest comrades got their entire bodies and legs blown off, or your family was stolen right in front of you, or you were tortured. Like that is post-traumatic stress. Like, you're getting burned in the laundry, or somebody called you an ism or an ist or something. That being on the level of post-traumatic stress. Again, the words, it almost means nothing at some point. And I think a lot of younger people that aren't, maybe, I even say I begun as someone that was very, very sensitive to language. Like I begun like, okay, well, if we're going to use these words like post-traumatic stress or, of privilege or something, we need to really go in detail and to define these to, be strict about what we're, calling. Sure, if we're going to call it racism or oppression or something, whatever that is, we need to be very particular about. We can't just throw that word around like it's nothing. But I think people now use those words so liberally that any discussion on the merits of these words or how they apply is then seen as like calling into question, that word itself. So it's like if I say like, what are we considering racist? Like, do we consider? And let's even have the argument about racism. Sure, let's engage in some isms here. So my argument around a lot of this, I think most people would sensibly agree with, but I think ultimately the conclusions that come after, like accepting this, I think can vary a lot. So I don't think anyone would say that people are all the same. Like men and women are all the same. Black and white people are all the same. There obviously are differences, and especially when we speak about things like race or just loose cultural things. Like we always have to speak in terms of a statistical mean or a statistical median. Maybe a median's probably a little bit better. So like when I say like generally women or generally men, I'm not talking about like I'll make the statement, men are generally taller than women. This is true. Like I don't know how else I could say that. Maybe I could phrase it, in a softer way. But in general, they are biologically taller. Now there are women that are 6'10". I'm not saying there are, and there are men that are 5'1". Like I get that. But if you were to like on average, if you were to say in general, I put a gun to your head, I have a man behind a door and a woman behind a door. Who do you think is taller? It would be foolish of me to go for the woman, or the equality. Same with like, and again, not to be crude here with race or anything, but like with black people and white people, there are differences in someone of African descent versus someone of Irish descent, right? And we can talk about the merits of those differences and how those differences might result in different behaviors. But I think any foray into that conversation is seen as like problematic because we might be assigning a value judgment that might be perceived as offensive, which I think is ultimately ruins any kind of point. Like if you have to avoid any difficult conversation, but you still insist on having a conversation, it's not going to be very good, right? Like you almost need to have difficult conversations where there are points of contention and you work the points of contention out such that things make sense. But I think we need to be open to engaging in these kinds of conversations. Like, okay, let's say you don't think black people are any different at all, right? You think they are identical and it is all like a matter of their environment. So like a black person and a white person growing up in the exact environment would have the exact same everything. I think many people might say, well, maybe not actually. Maybe there are differences. And same with like men and women. Like they might, growing in the same environment have totally different things. I think most people would agree with that too, because it's like, well, obviously there are differences, biologically, but there are also differences in terms of their interests and intellectually. This might even be the bigger issue of like differences is I think people like want to conflate what differences are. I can say, well, there are differences between them, but then what are those differences exactly? And I think not to say they're different in every way, but in every way there are slight differences, right? And obviously I think like, we have much more in common with females. Like males have much more in common with females than we do with bananas or with other species. So I'm not saying there's any kind of different species. I'm not saying that at all. Obviously, we have far more in common, and same with people of other races. We obviously have far more in common with them than we do, not. But are there, like, I think recognizing, okay, there probably are some differences in, someone of Irish versus African descent. Okay, these are cultural differences, or, and cultural differences are also kind of inbuilt into DNA. We can't beat that out of them, right? I think you even look at people that, have immigrated places, and they carry a lot of the same problems with them. So if you're an alcoholic Irish guy, in Ireland, you move to America and you grew up in America, you might still be the alcoholic Irishman. You're still that inside. It's not like you're not different because you grew up in a different area. There are still some immutable characteristics of your DNA that embody themselves in your behavior and your actions. And, and maybe we can extrapolate to culture. Like your DNA does have differences in culture. And there are obviously environmental factors, but I think, and this even might even be the heart of the debate, is like, to what extent is, the whole nature versus nurture debate. Like, to what extent are these factors, you know, is it mostly nature or mostly nurture? And I think I would be on the side of saying that the scientific or materialistic regime tends to think too far in terms of the nurture. Like they tend to overvalue our ability to incite change on people. In the same way we can incite change chemically on the brain or with muscles and different things, we tend to think that we have supreme regime over how the differences in culture and developing people into the different things, which is manipulation, on one level, but also I just think is incorrect. I think there are unfortunately or fortunately for us, really, there are more immutable characteristics of our personhood than we would like to admit. And I don't think living that way is helpful, in the sense that everything is DNA, it's all inbuilt. I think having a philosophy where, your DNA is a given and you acknowledge what you're good at already, but you don't let it stop you, or you can let it inform your decisions. So it's like, for example, my DNA didn't make me 6'11". So, okay, so I'm not incredibly tall, so I probably shouldn't go for a career in basketball, right? Because it's just not. It doesn't make much sense. Now it's informing my decision, and you can't really. It'd be stupid of me to call it like privilege because someone else is taller than me. But of course I'm taller than average, in reality. But regardless, it'd be silly of me to get angry because someone else has a genetic advantage over me, and I think that's fair to say. Somebody who is 6'11" has a genetic advantage for basketball over me. Now, in that same sense, I might have a genetic advantage in something else. And notice I've said nothing about race here, but I guarantee you, your mind has already gone, well, are you talking about a black guy playing? No, I could have been very easily talking about a woman playing basketball, or a 6'10", Hispanic guy. It wouldn't matter, right? And we're just saying that there are obviously differences. And I think people understand this because, my head immediately went to a black guy when I talked about a tall person playing basketball. And so did most of you, I'm sure. But like, I think calling that racist, I think in one way limits the conversation we're able to have. Because then it's like, well, then why did you just go to a black guy? Why did you have to assume he'd be black if he's 6'10" and playing basketball? It's like, well, I didn't, but is it possible? Is it even, I'll say it's probable that, being tall and athletic, you're more likely, like a black person is more likely to be taller and more athletic than a white person. I think even in terms of physical superiority, if you, again, had a black guy and a white guy behind a curtain and you asked me to pick one for my team, depending on the sport, if basketball is the sport, I'm probably going to pick the black guy. And you can call that racist, but it's statistics, really. I think in general, I don't have the birth statistics in front of me. I don't walk around with numbers, at my waist all the time. But I'm almost certain in telling you, and I know for a fact that if you look at the posterior chains of infants, the posterior chains, which is like the muscles on the back half of your body, so your hamstrings, your glutes, your lats, everything essentially, behind your body, the back half if you're looking at the front, those were more developed in infants, in African American infants, than in Caucasian or European infants. And that's again, that's an average, on average. I'm not saying that there isn't a white person that's taller, that there aren't unathletic black people. And that's even a good thing. We're even saying a good thing about, like, I wish that my genetic predisposition was that I was taller and better at sports. That would be great, right? But it's not. But I think even a discussion where a positive attribute about race can't be had because, well, this is a discussion about race and that's racist. I think that is stupid. I think we need to have open discussions about race, even if it feels a little racisty, right? I think that's part of what we need to get over. I think we've kind of been, browbeaten about, sensitivities, and because of our, international tragedies of the Holocaust and things, we're very sensitive to, problems of culture, and we don't want that to happen again. But I also think the way that things really fall apart is if we have an inability to communicate about these things. If I can't have a nuanced discussion on race or on misogyny or gender, and I even hate using the word misogyny because that almost makes it sound like I'm trying to put a value somewhere and say that, well, men are better than women. Which is this is another kind of important. I guess while I'm tackling a big subject, I might as well. Um, my issue with feminism, which I've talked about before, is feminism to me, the word itself. And again, I'm quibbling about the words here because I think if we're gonna use words and pretend they're like super important, we have to be very precise about what we're even calling the fucking word. We can't just say the word racism or misogyny without what exactly qualifies as that, and how generic is that term, and when would that term apply to something that may be useful, right? So it's like me preferring a black person over a white person. Is that racist? Well, it's like maybe that's just actually sensitive to what the strengths and weaknesses are. That's like I would choose somebody who has a strength in a certain thing because they might be better at it, and it may have to do with their race because their race influences that. But I think if you don't think race has any influence on your physical attributes or any aspect of culture, or even say like how articulate you are, or the words you decide to use, or any of that, like if you think it's entirely independent, I would disagree with that. I think there are immutable characteristics of your DNA that is tied to race. I'm not saying that there aren't, you know but running a statistical average on things and being, again, the median person of this disposition would have certain characteristics that might be a strength or a weakness in some context. Um, but with regards to that, same with like the feminism movement. The word feminism to me should be synonymous with a celebration of feminine values. Right? If you're a feminist, you want to promote feminine values, which would make sense to me. Like the word itself would make sense. Like if a meninist, or someone who's would be someone that's promoting masculine values. Okay, a feminine should be someone that's promoting feminine values. However, the way I look at a lot of modern feminist, the way it actually happens is that these are women that are kind of adopting masculine characteristics, which is fine. That's not saying that there's any necessarily wrong with that either, but I also don't think I'm out of line in saying that women probably aren't better at being men than men are, right? Which again, that sounds like a very misogynist comment to make, but I want you to really understand, like, believe and understand that there are differences genetically with people. People are not all the same. Like it's almost like this World Economic Forum. Like everyone is this like individual economic unit, and people are just interchangeable. You can just throw them in. I think that is a stupid way not only to live and to view people, but to organize a society, in the sense that everyone is just this fungible token that can be passed back and forth, and it doesn't matter as long as it's labor and time, and there's no aspect of culture or shared experience or anything that matters, right? Like there's no history. History is unimportant. Culture is unimportant. But I think a lot of people, would say, well, of course not. Culture is very important. It's important we celebrate culture. But then when I say something like, well, not even culture, but just like genetics, men in general are more likely to have higher traits associated with masculine behavior, which have been documented since the beginning of like time. I mean, even going back to like the Roman times, they discussed differences, gender differences, which again is not, this isn't about equality. We're just talking about the differences about that and where the strengths and weaknesses might lie. So with a feminist movement that is promoting, masculine values, which is the way I see it. So, being a boss ass bitch, you taking home the big bucks, equal things as men. And I think a lot of what that is, and it isn't that any of those things by themselves or in a vacuum are inherently wrong, or that we should bar women from doing that who show ability and capacity to do that. But on average, women are better at being women than they are at being men. And same with like if you wanted dudes to be. So let's even go over some masculine and feminine characteristics to kind of to help drive this point home for me. It's like, okay, a masculine characteristic might be like, aggression, risk taking, um, you know, I don't know, like logical planning or something like that. Whereas feminine characteristics might be, grace, navigating a social hierarchy, even listening, forgiveness, and these are things that also all sound good, but they sound like, weak or something. They're feminine, is what they are. Like those are feminine characteristics, and those should be celebrated. I think part of a lot of our issues with society is that we don't celebrate those values anymore. We don't celebrate forgiveness. We don't celebrate, navigating social situations. We're more autistic now than ever, especially dudes. Like we disregard the entire sociality aspect of it. Same with like safety and being feeling protected. Like that's a feminine characteristics, but like we don't want to live in the wild west where everyone has to, we're a libertarian free state where everyone's running around with rifles and shooting each other. Like nobody wants to live that. Like people enjoy safety and security. You know, whether that makes them soft is another conversation, but regardless, like that's still a good characteristic, and striving for that in a society as complicated and as large as ours is today makes a lot of fucking sense. But I think the feminist movement that hijacks masculine characteristics of domination, competition, winning, being the best at, like those are not feminine characteristics. So to me, it wouldn't make much sense that women would be better at that than men, because those are masculine characteristics that genetically are like disposed to men. Now, if the other argument is like, well, all right, we're because we're a technologically advanced society, we're actually trying to get rid of men and women as different entities, and we're trying to like conform them into one gender so it's easier. And if I were a totalitarian surveillance state, that would make more sense to me. That would be that would line up, right? If we wanted everyone to be these equal units of economics and work, I think one way to do that would be to destroy any sense of differences between people. So destroy the gender differences between men and women, destroy the cultural differences between Mexicans and Irish. Doesn't matter. They're all the fucking same. And then destroy any differences people, so that people are all essentially can be treated the same. Now, my argument is that people are not the same, and they won't be the same, and no amount of trying, forced cultural assimilation or economic assimilation will make them the same. They are different. They will be different. It will take longer than we have, and more resources than we have, and more effort than it's worth to beat culture and beat gender out of people, right? And essentially like trying to beat the woman out of a woman or beat the man out of a man. I'm just saying it's easier for us, and it would be more simple for us not to battle our biology to the extent that we do. Now we can, and some people again are predisposed to fight that battle. I'm saying that there are people, that are women that have lots and lots of masculine characteristics, and they should perhaps go into masculine fields and do masculine things. But I think a lot of women that see that, there's a sense of empowerment and saying, oh, well, it's great. Like I want to be able to do, anything I want. I don't want to be held down. But then also it's like, all right, well then what are you actually good at? Like, what are your strengths? Like, is that your strength? Are you Are you a very masculine female? Same with like, men in the other way. It's like, all right, well, if you don't really care about, I don't know what's a female thing, like, I don't know, like gossip or fashion or like, the actor drama or something. I don't even know. It's like, I guess I'm not really sure what, this might be a good thing. I'm not really sure what women, I guess talk about or have hold as their dear values of things. But I think it'd be unnatural to push a man into that mold simply because it's, it would be equal, right? And I think it's a natural phenomenon of man and of the world and mankind that things are not created equal. Now, constitutionally and legally, there are differences. Now, legally, everyone needs to be treated as equal, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. So, in the eyes of the law, like there shouldn't be any discrepancy between like who cares if you're white or you're black or you're a woman. Like it should apply. The legal standard should apply. Like, okay, who are you a citizen of? All right, you have the rights of those citizenships. Like and in America, because we have protected classes, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. The gender does not matter in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of culture and of the rest of it, I think you can make much, much different conclusions about things. Same with, this is another kind of absurd argument to have, but, it's one that I think should still be in bounds with like, pedophilia. Like people are scared of being called a pedophile or terrified. So any nuanced discussion on like we'll say like the developmental ages of women, is completely thwarted. Like there's absolutely no way that anyone's going to have a sensible conversation about what age women actually, like, by and large mature at, when might they be ready to have children or whatever. Literally, if you say anything, even denoting that, like, a 17-year-old might have, might be fully matured, you are a complete pedophile and you just belong in the prison. Which, again, from a legal standard, 18 is a perfectly reasonable and acceptable age for me, and I accept it. And I think, again, as if I was the judge in a legal standard, somebody having sex with someone under 18 should be in jail. As a legal standard, that should apply. However, I think we should still be able to have a moral discussion on, again, when female, because otherwise we're never gonna, we'll pick these arbitrary things and we'll section all them off where no one's ever allowed to talk about them ever again. It's like it just seems silly. It's like same with like boxing off, slavery or the Holocaust, or boxing off these different. We have to be able to discuss these issues openly, including ones that make people really uncomfortable, like being a pedophile, right? So it's like, now from a moral judgment, this is where the moral judgment come in. Would you consider it the same thing as, like, okay, somebody forcibly conceiving a child with an 11-year-old versus a 17-year-old that snuck into a party? Okay, like, obviously in my eyes those are not the same. Like, the 17-year-old snuck into a party, like, I don't view that on the same moral level as the you know lack of a better word, the rape of an 11-year-old, right? That's not the same to me. And I think, but legally those are the same, and legally they can be treated the same. I'm okay with the legal standard of treating them the same, but morally, we cannot. That makes no sense to me to treat them the same, because I'm not going to let the law completely, define all of my beliefs just because it's whatever is legal. Whatever is legal is not necessarily the right thing, right? And I think the law should be a good litmus test for, like, the bare minimum, right? So again, the bare minimum is 18. Like, you shouldn't be messing around, fooling around with anyone who's under 18 if you're of age, because again, it's the bare fucking minimum. Is like, obviously it's most normal and healthy to just stick within your age group, right? Like within 5 or 10 years of who you are. And again, if you're, it's different if you're 45. Maybe you can date a 28-year-old. It's a little weird, but I would imagine, honestly, anything outside of the range of like 5 years even gets weird. I know parents that have 10 or 12-year age differences, and those are weird too, because it almost feels like you grew up in a different era. I think you'd almost want to be with somebody that at least grew up when they're around the same time as you. It's like, I grew up with Nintendo DSs and the Wii or something, but if somebody grew up on, like, you know I don't know, those floppy disks or something, or Netscape Navigator, it's going to be a little bit of different, culturally. It's the whole Bill Belichick and the 25-year-old woman thing. It's weird that's supposed to work, right? But regardless, I got off track with the whole pedophile thing. I think we need to be able to have discussions that make people really uncomfortable. And if you're someone who is uncomfortable by conversations of female maturity from a sociological or biological evolutionary perspective, which is what I'm not talking about pedophiles here. I'm talking about the psychosexual development of women in the modern age. If you're uncomfortable with that, then fine, you can excuse yourself from those conversations. But I think banning those conversations, or telling them, someone who's having that conversation, that they're a pedophile, or if it was about race and, like, the potential structural differences between different races, or the cultural impacts of different histories on different, like, to think those are factors that we can just ignore and we can just kind of gloss over them. It's like that is absurd. Like, even like, we'll say the history between like India and Britain, right? These are like almost a contentious relationship where Britain was running the East India Trading Company, perhaps enslaving or doing a lot of bad things to people all over. It's like, obviously a lot of that baggage is going to float around for the rest of time. Like, if you're asking everyone to just forget that happened, I think is silly. Same with slavery in America. Like, no one's just going to forget that happened and move on and pretend like nothing ever happened. So we obviously need to have discussions on these things, but I think going with one narrative and not allowing things to open up and say, well, how do you actually think slavery affected the development? Like, what are the perhaps negative things that happen, and the positive genetic differences that has resulted over time? And even if it's not genetic, what if it's more cultural, right? Because a lot of that is inheritable. But I think that's a much more nuanced discussion to have, albeit a difficult one, but one that I think should be allowed. But I think people are, again, the bipolarity being, people are either way too scared of using any word or being called an ism or an ist, or they got to the point where, kind of where I am, where it's like, dude, I don't give a fuck what you call me. I literally don't care. somebody, I would not. Somebody calls me a racist, it really wouldn't offend me because it almost means nothing to me at this point. I don't, it's not. I know what my preference is, and I understand how I see the world, and I know that I don't immediately look at a black person and go, like I don't. I'm not a racist person. I understand that, and no amount of you calling me racist is going to make me racist. But I just think using the word is lazy and it is boring, and it doesn't help anyone, not even the black people that you're supposedly protecting by pointing out the racists. They're not saying, oh, well, thank you. Now, instead of a nuanced discussion about race and culture, we can now have a shouting match where, I have to defend that I'm not a racist. And it's like, I don't even care. Just call me a fucking racist if you'll shut up and move on to the next thing. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's truly meaningless. And I think more and more people now agree with that because, I think there are newer people that come around that they're called racist and like, well, you're gonna listen to him. He's obviously a racist. And like, even if so, suppose that like I don't know, I'm mentioned in some kind of news article, right? I always wonder about what the first off, how many adjectives am I going to get, right? Am I going to get one adjective or would I get multiple, right? Because you can get like you can get the ones like the crude, boisterous, or the funny, or the witty, whatever. Or you can get like the with well-known racist Rusty Bucket, right? You like a well-known anti-Semite racist Rusty Buckets or something. So I'm always curious to see or curious in thinking about what my adjectives are, or if I have any, whenever that day, hopefully never comes, but if that day does come, what tags are given to me, and then to me, it's like, all right, there's no point in me even defending, like, well, but I'm not racist. But look at all these black friends I have. It's such a silly and a point. People don't fucking care anymore. I don't think anyone, and I'm hoping people, like more people that are on this extreme end, of kind of guarding language, move into this point where it's like, dude, shut up. Just let's have an actual, like, we're going to debate about this. Let's talk about the merits. Stop calling me names. I don't care. You can call me whatever you want. I literally don't care what you call me. You can call me the N word. It's like, I'm still going to want to have the discussion because it's interesting. And I think it is, is useful for us. The name calling, the shit hurling means nothing. Like calling me a racist, even if you definitively prove, by whatever logic you have that I'm a misogynist or something, calling me that will do nothing. Right. How many more people are going to be called racist? Go, you know what? Man, you're right. I'm sorry. I am racist. And there's no changing that. I have to do whatever you say. It's just silly to me. I don't know. There's just this interesting like bipolarity of people policing language, and then those that have kind of gone past this point where it's like they have almost this contempt for the words that people use. Like, I don't even care. I have to almost make up new words so that I can speak about things without getting censored. Right? It's like I can't say racist, but I can say like inherent cultural differences, which again is more sensitive. But if I'm still talking about, you know, how black people are different, it's just a dog whistle at that point, which I think is even less constructive. I think if you were to stick with just like, having discussions on, these things, and letting people use the words that, are either most comfortable or easiest to come to them, I think that's preferable over, over these like mystery dog whistles. You don't really know where these people are, what they're talking about, unless you look after these dog whistles. And then everyone's just speaking in code, which I think it's better for everyone just to speak normally and not take language so goddamn serious. And every one little thing you say has to turn into some character representation, or some permanent character representation. Because I see this a lot where people are clipped. Like I even say, you could even clip me in one of these videos and be like, "Holy shit, this guy is actually he's psychotic and he needs help." Like I have no doubt at all that if you watch these videos and you went through clipping everything, you could get heinous clips out of me. The difference is it's always in the context of me talking to myself alone for an hour about things that I find interesting, with the disclaimer that most of it should not be listened to by anyone, and are ideas that are so fickle and and with concepts that are so illusory that I'm just playing with, that none of this should be taken seriously, much less be spouted off or used as evidence of some kind. This is not, I understand that it is, everything is evidence to some degree, but the point isn't for me to win some debate or some argument. It's really for me to explore my own ideas and things, and that includes the perhaps problematic ideas that I have. I think those shouldn't be any more off limits than the silly philosophical quibblings that I have all the time. I feel like we should still, we still need to be able to talk about those difficult things. And if you don't like doing that, then don't. right? Or if you don't like listening to that, then don't fucking then get off my channel. It's like I don't know what else to tell you. Same with other stuff. It's like if you are uncomfortable by any discussion around, the potential differences in culture of race or of different, even differences between Irishes and Italians, right? Like, if you're uncomfortable talking about Italian people writ large, or maybe that line only comes to when it's black people writ large, if you're uncomfortable there, then leave the conversation. I don't think you're someone who's, truly going to be open minded enough. Um, I started off this episode, mentioning edgelords because it's an interesting concept to me, and I guess for those unfamiliar, I guess congratulations, you don't know what an edgelord is, but I imagine if you're watching this video, you probably are an edgelord, or at least the likelihood of you being an edgelord is much higher. But generally, an edgelord is someone that I see at least is like it's a provocateur of sorts. It's a modern provocateur where they've certainly crossed this threshold that I've talked about, where it's like I don't care what you call me. I'm more interested in the idea. I don't care what I don't. Me personally, I'm not going to be. I don't really care. I'm here to kind of, to investigate and understand things. And at their worst, edgelords just kind of make unfunny memes, that are purposefully racist or provocative or something. But I really think at their best, edgelords are the closest things we have to modern critics. They're I think they're or even modern philosophers. Really, they're most able to kind of tackle the questions that no one wants to ask, because now it's not questions that we can't think to ask. It's simply questions that we don't want to, and questions that would perhaps call into question too many of our assumptions to ask. And not to say that edgelords are the only people that do this. There are other people that might have a better way of going about it. But I think on one level, kind of disregarding this like sanctity of language and saying I don't care what these words. I don't care what the words you think they mean. Like I'm gonna pull these ideas out from this layer of abstraction of language and behind all these pithy kind of vague definitions and really see what are the actual ideas that we're working with. And maybe I'm being too generous to edgelords and saying, and maybe most of them are just these kind of neckbeard incel memers that just like memeing things. But I think a good number of my friends, the more thoughtful ones, are the ones that again are this highly provocative kind, where they their ideas are always interesting or unique, but in a very very provocative way. And if you don't appreciate that kind of personality, then again don't. I guess get off the internet because it's full of edgelords, but then also you can also stay away with them. That's that's one thing. But edgelords, I think by and large, are the internet is their medium, right? I think even from everything from like a a podcast to a video meme or even just like a text meme, that an edgelord makes, is ultimately what those are the people that make the content for the internet. So all the brain rot that you see made is by and large, I qualify those as edgelord created content. But I think that that's again that's where all the brain rot lies. But I think it's also where there's a lot of thoughtful discussion to be had. Because again, related to the whole pedophile discussion, the only person who I think in good faith would ever have a conversation about the maturation ages are like either a historic gynecologist or someone who's like studying gender differences, or an edgelord. The people only people that would truly entertain a conversation with me about that are either like specific field experts who have made a living and understand all the nuances and are kind of used to having arguments about these things, or edgelords that are willing to argue and talk about anything. But I think most people don't like having those conversations because they're uncomfortable. They don't want to be associated with anything that might even seem racist. And part of this is just out of fear. Everything it's all fear based. People are scared that somehow they become this evil villain, and we've made these villains out in history already. Hitler's a huge villain. I guess some of those conservative generals are big villains, right? The ones down south, perpetuating slavery. These are all villains, right? And we're very scared of becoming, the villain. I suppose unless you're one of these tech oligarch billionaires, 'cause that's the real villain now, is being a tech bro or whatever. They're almost weirdly cool about the whole villain thing. And I think in terms of villains, I don't really like their aesthetic. Right. I guess I'm going to do a brief aside here on the aesthetics of on the aesthetics of tech bros. I think I don't like the aesthetic. I think it's a weak aesthetic. It's like, it's gender neutral. It's like effeminate. It's sweatpants. It's baggy. It's kind of unkept hair. And then the attitude is like a, kind of a general contempt for the world, but then like, obviously like some autistic brilliance mixed in there. I just don't love the tech bro thing where it's like the world's well understood. We get it, and we're gonna fix it for everything. I think the more the healthier understanding, the healthier conception of the world is like this is a giant mystery. Life is kind of an adventure. Whereas I think tech people see the world as like, well, it's obviously just a bunch of physics, and we'll crank out the details, and we'll get you an app and get you in the metaverse in no time. It's like that. That to me seems okay. Hold on a second. Wait, you're just gonna blow past all of this, the history and philosophy and why we're here. We're gonna go straight into like, oh, everyone's going to be in the pod and be happy or something. Or they'll like acknowledge like metaphysics will be like, yeah, there's like, we can figure all that out later, but we got to like hash out these, we got to hash out the surveillance state, really. So it's really what they're saying is they have to usher in all of the tools that they have to track and sort and itemize people into all their constituent parts. Because that's really all it is like all of technology is like creating, words or abstractions for things, implementing machines, on some level to then kind of automate a lot of these things. And it is a good progression. I'm not against, all of technology or, even computing technology or, manufacturing technology or any of that. But in general, it is the itemization and kind of the quantification, or even the quantification of qualitative information to the best of our ability, to the point where we're trying to simplify and solve for, human well-being or satisfaction, right? So then it's like all becomes this like aggregate. Everything's numbers in the aggregate. It's always like these numbers of people, labor numbers, and that's why I think economists and these tech people get along a lot. Is the economists love the idea that like humans are these fungible entities. You can just pass them back and forth. They don't mean anything. Age is kind of a number. It affects their labor output, and mental health kind of kills a few, some percentage of them. But we can kind of boil it down to like, all right, here's the the real labor force that we have. It's this number of people with this many man years left, and this average intellect or something, which I think is just an insult to the human condition. But that mindset goes along really well with this tech bro like kind of detached. Well, it's like, well, yeah, I can program all this. It's like, yeah, I can put that into a, oh, you have it in a spreadsheet, I'll put it in a database, and we'll build an app around it or something. And to the tech people, it's more about like, I almost look at it as like this, German fixation with like numbers, and they love like organized things, and I believe me, I love that too. I have German heritage. I do love the numbers and that part of it, but at the same time, I also realize how inhuman it is to kind of boil things down to like that's why I would almost be too, I'd hate to be in any kind of position of power where that's almost what you have to do is you have to abstract, if you're in a community of, let's say you run a town of, if you're in a town of 500 people, maybe it's, maybe you can know everybody and you can be the mayor and you could fight for your towns. But if you're running a town of, or a city of 300,000, you have really no choice but to think of people in aggregate numbers. You have no choice but to look at the biggest fish and go, all right, well, who are these people? Like, how can we conceptualize them in a way that we can help them? How can we look at numbers in mass? We're not looking at, it's not Jerry or Sally or the local baker. It's just 48,000 people of this demographic and of that demographic. And because of that, these categorizations and tags are very useful, and we love using them because they categorize people and very nicely. But I think if we're speaking about the benefit of humanity, and we back up to a more metaphysical or even spiritual or religious level, that amount of quantification is, again, as I'd say, is an insult to like just the human condition in general. So I think if we're going to have some kind of renaissance at all, it needs to be a renaissance, a moral renaissance of sorts. I don't think any amount of logistical, because I think that's what the tech people kind of see their future as. It's as a logistical renaissance where we figured out because we're so smart and we have all these AI things, logistically we figured out exactly how to feed everybody, how to make everybody happy. It's like it was a logistics nightmare, but like because of our ingenuity, we figured out. I don't think logistics is the way out of this. I don't think any amount of planning or quantifying the human condition will lead us to a utopia. I think if there's anything that even has a chance of being utopian-esque, it is a individual moral renaissance where people begin to, both embrace the negative aspects of life that, bring out the positive, in the same way that, like, I think merging the genders is stupid because there's a yin and yang to all of this. It's like it's almost like we don't want to question the biology too much, but there's obviously there's male and female of almost every species out there. It's not like, very few have like three, genders, or have, a lot of the male and female dynamic is supported. And it's obviously animals have different manifestations of it, but a lot of them all have male and female counterparts. Like they all have a yin to their yang. There's always kind of an opposite. So same with like the pain and the struggle and the uncertainty of life is balanced out by a lot of that. And I think that we have to accept that pain and suffering and uncertainty and fear is an inbuilt part of the human process. And I think no amount of logistics or cowering or hiding or abstracting it to somebody else or whatever, or kicking the can down the road is going to solve that, that underlying problem where you cannot make life any better than it is bad, right? Like in order to really, it's almost like wish people would get in these like, near-death experiences so they can appreciate life better. And I even said that for myself. I wish I had that. And ironically, I kind of did, after kind of speaking it into existence. Um, and obviously, like if I were to look at my life as like a chessboard and like, what pieces I had and what were my advantages, I wouldn't say that that was an advantage for me. I would say that that is, in every conceivable way, it sets me back. There's no universe in which I am better off because of the medical problems I've had. I don't see that's not really possible. However, that's like the literal logical view. However, I would say on a more, again, a more wishy-washy spiritual level, that I am glad that like that stuff happened, and that I do think, however I end up, like whatever, the last breath is I have, I think I'll take it knowing and thinking and being certain that like it was a good thing that happened to me. And I hope, and I think I'm going to say this about everything that, really happens in my life, but I hope and I hope I'm right about that. And I really, truly think I am right about that. I don't think I'll ever kind of walk back and say, man, I wish I didn't, I'm not going to be thinking about, wish I didn't get this, or wish this XYZ bad thing didn't happen to me. I think the healthiest way and the best way to go about living is to say, well, whatever did happen to me is the best possible thing that could have happened to me, or at least to make that reality as close to, the actual reality as possible. Right. So it's like you know, whatever stupid thing happens to me, how do I make it the best possible thing that could have happened? So more that's just up to me and, I guess living out my destiny or being true to myself, and less about me complaining about bad things that have happened to me, or, figuring out ways to enumerate them. Because I could also like, enumerate or itemize or quantify all these bad things that happened and, figure out exactly like, figure out how much it would set me back or something. Or I think the more, pragmatic and realistic way to go about it, just fucking, I don't know, eat it and move on. I don't know, figure out some other way, you know, make do with whatever it is. Like, yes, it's not perfect. Yes, I wish it didn't happen. Yes, I could spend all day complaining or feeling bad or, trying to get these emergency medical or whatever. Figure out some miracle way to undo everything. It's not going to happen, right? I just move the fuck on. That's truly like the best red pill I can give myself with, and other people too, with any of these problems. Like, you're not going to undo the universe's wrongs. The world is unfair, and I don't think no amount of like tallying up who got what is going to make it any fairer. Because that's kind of what a lot of these, like, I'm not going to say reparations and things are, but it's all like, well, you got this advantage and they didn't get this advantage, so like we need to make it even. It's like, I think if we're going to spend all day doing that, there's no limit on the degree at which we can go down the list of tribulations and trivialities, and because we can go all the way back, right? I'm Irish, we can go all the way back to the potato famine, right? It's like, or we could go with like the non-complicit Nazis, the ones that were ostracized from Germany for not hating the Jews or whatever. Like, we can go down all these fucking. It is a waste of fucking time. Like, the best use of our time is to grab your fucking nuts and start doing something, right? And make whatever problem you had into some kind of it, even if it truly is not an advantage. Because I don't think there's any way I could say it's an advantage, but God damn it, I'm going to make it seem like it was an advantage. And if someone ever comes to me, I'm going to say, yeah, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. Even though in actuality, probably not, right? But I think that mentality, you even hear that in interviews. They're like, well, how could it be a good thing? It's like that because they adopted that mentality and they took that to the fucking bank, right? They're not sitting there uncertain of whether, like, man, it really sucked that happened. I wish, it didn't do that way. It's like, no, fine. Like, whatever, okay? Let's even be more extreme. Let's say both your parents got run over in a car accident. You could make that the sob story of your life. You could do nothing for the rest of your life, and nobody would say a word. Everyone would be like, you know what? Both his parents got run over. Pretty reasonable guy to just kind of sit there and rot, right? No one's going to fault that person for being, for doing nothing with their life, right? And no one's. I wouldn't even fault the guy himself. Even if I'm talking to him, it's like, well, your parents got run over. It's pretty brutal. But at the same time, like the best thing that guy could do is, say, fuck that. I don't care. Like, yes, I love my parents. Horrible situation. Wish it didn't happen. What's next? Right? How can I redeem their legacy? Like, how do I move on past that? It is not wallowing in your pity and feeling and excusing yourself for because bad things have happened to you. Bad things have happened to everybody throughout all of history. The good ones don't let it define them. They fucking move on and they find they move on to the next fucking thing. They don't spend all day trying to tally up how much, their problems make it harder for their life than someone else's problems. Because there's always someone else with bigger problems than you. Like you were born with one leg, someone was born with 0 legs, right? You were born with one parent, someone have 0 parents. Siblings, maybe fine. You had no siblings. The other one had an abusive sibling. All right, so who wins? It's like, are we really going to go to the suppression Olympics every fucking, not even every 4 years, every second, every year? It's not. It is not. It is a waste of time. So I don't know. I'm not sure where this leaves me, but it does leave me at the end of this episode. So thanks for watching. Peace out, and I'll see you in the next one.